how to be more memorable with special guest Vinnie Potestivo on today's episode.
Today's episode is brought to you by Descript. Every book, podcast, and YouTube video that I publish is transcribed by Descript. I've used all of the competitors and nobody comes close to their quality. And the price is the lowest in the business as well. If you want to speed up production and grow your online business, go to servemaster.com/Descript right now.
Are you tired of dealing with your boss? Do you feel underpaid and underappreciated? If you want to make it online, fire your boss and start living your retirement dreams now, then you've come to the right place. Welcome to Serve No Master Podcast, where you'll learn how to open new revenue streams and make money while you sleep. Presented live from a tropical island in the South Pacific by best-selling author Jonathan Green. Now, here's your host.
We are part of a generation where everyone wants to be famous or significant, even if they haven't done anything yet. And one of my favorite things is when people say, oh, why don't you remember who I am? I say, maybe it's not my fault. Maybe you need to be more memorable, right? It's not my fault. I can't remember. When I meet a lot of people, I interview a lot of guests on my show. I've worked with a lot of people. I've been in this business for 12 years. Maybe you just need to be more memorable. So what do you think about that? We have this generation where everyone wants to be famous, but everyone can't be famous at the same time.
Yeah, right. But they want to be famous. I'm hoping they want to be famous for that moment when greatness does happen so that they can maximize on that moment. Is that why they would thrive to want to be famous prior to actually doing the thing that will probably be etched in permanent memory, or certainly be the experience of how most of us experience them? By the way, I have to say, you framed this brilliantly about being memorable. I never thought about that as the pain point. The honest, simple answer to this entire conversation is being more shareable. That's all it comes down to is the more I can get you to be easier to share in your story, your content, your contacts. And we'll talk a lot about things that we can do to make you easier to share and be more shareable. But ultimately, that's the trick. It's not more visibility. More visibility doesn't lead to discoverability. Shareability leads to discoverability. That's something that I'd love to talk about, especially for people creating content, whether you're doing it on social natively first, or you're running a business and you use social or private media, or even want to leverage both of those into the public sector. By the way, I love podcast to broadcast. And if we can go there towards the end of this and we have time, then we've done a good job at staying on topic. But I get excited about that framing of it, right? How do I stay more memorable? Shareable. It's got to be, it's all about shareability, relevancy. What are you sharing? How are you part of the conversation? What are you doing? And now that you can think of artists and brands that literally are known for seasons, Macy's owns this concept around family and Thanksgiving, right around the hottest day of shopping. By the way, who else? Amazon's in on it right now, and a lot of other brands now, right? So now you see these trends. These are the things that we as independent creators and independent business owners have capability of owning and facilitating. It's powerful. It's a powerful time. And especially with this creator economy, it's a powerful time right now to be in content.
Yeah, I think a lot of people right now, they think the answer to every problem is going viral until it happens. And the thing about virality is easy come, easy go, right? A day later, people who chase virality, who watch viral videos, which is not me. I always see a viral video 6 years late. I'm the last one to see every trend. And by the time I see it, right, the person's forgotten. And that's the thing, is that people who follow a trend, they're looking at a new one each day. They're the people who pay the least attention to the things that last, right? They're the ones who are hardest to convert into a customer or a fan, because they're more a fan of viral videos. It reminds me of in the 1990s when I grew up, you used to watch America's Funniest Home Videos, right? You would not choose one of those videos and be a fan of them, right? It was a fan of the show, the clip show. And so I think that's the danger of virality. I'm a big believer in consistency, or finding the right fans as opposed to the masses, because at least from my business perspective, it's very hard when someone says, who's your audience? You go, everybody. Well, then it's hard to get a good brand deal, as opposed to if your audience is only men 40 to 50 who are into trucking. Now you know who to partner with. It's such a difference that we want the broad appeal of fame when often there's more money in being a little bit more narrow, because then at least you know what products your audience likes.
Well, it's funny, as you're saying this, I'm getting this really strong image of surfing, and I'm equating that to how dangerous it is to actually go viral. Right? It's a much more dangerous sport, surfing, and trying to get those big waves and being known for surfing, than it is to be in a controlled setting. For example, I don't know, an Olympic swimmer, in a swimming pool where there's consistency, and with multiple systems and consistency comes expertise. And so it's funny to think about these as like almost two different types of sports, right? So I'll say, look, I just never, maybe because I come from I'm lucky that I come from TV and that I got to create. Well, I'm lucky that I worked at MTV, really, to be specific, that as a network, we got to find stars, create content. I was actually part of production and seeing it on air, as opposed to now where a lot of that production company network platform, there's a lot of separation now. And I was lucky 25 years ago when at MTV with the boom of a sort of unscripted programming as we were figuring out the formats, the SOPs, right? I wrote the SOPs for talent development for about 30 other international MTV properties, how to take a global brand and tap into local talent. You got to speak their language from cultural community perspective. And if you're that's dangerous. That's like surfing. You got to be right at the top, at the front of the sport, at the line all the time, as opposed to consistency. Both, by the way, have their merits. So either way you choose, God bless you. I know the consistency piece a little better. Again, maybe because I did have this like creative / corporate background in casting. So what I actually, in creating content and getting unscripted shows like Wildin' Out, or putting TJ Lavin in The Challenge, or casting shows like Housewives from New Jersey and Millionaire Matchmaker, a bunch of shows on Bravo and MTV and VH1 and CBS and NBC in that lifestyle genre programming, I think. And what I try to do now is bringing back all those lessons I learned from the Osbournes and Ashton on Punk'd and Newlyweds, all the lessons I learned in the power and how we can lean into our own story. I saw it happen with Jessica Simpson and Ashton and Kelly and Jack. It changed their lives. The choices they make change their lives, but only if it's seen, visibility, only if it's seen, and then shareable, if it's easy at that point to talk about. So MTV had to start putting those episodes on 50, 60, 70 times in 3 months. There would be heavy rotations. Cable was known for being able to see repeat episodes. That's the reason. That's how we're able to substantiate the conversation. And a lot of that conversation, by the way, I'll get heady and then I want to pull back, but a lot of that conversation, when you look at the news cycle from the public sector of content, news, talk shows, then there's this social media sector. I can point out when Jimmy Fallon or any of the Jimmys are recording a moment in their talk show on their nationally syndicated talk show that I know is intended to be lifted and put into social media. So I know that they're using cross-lateral not only that, but then the monologue is turned into a podcast. Steve Harvey is brilliant at this. He has his questions with Steve Harvey as one podcast. He has his monologue as another. I mean, the reach is ridiculous when you own that content. I'm not saying you should all try to be news magnets or late night show hosts or even need that format, but to be thinking about how to be more shareable. All of those things have one thing in common. They're created in segments for time. It's got to be easy. It's got to be concise, and it's got to be something that should create. The act of creating is getting from one point to the other. Casting is bringing one point in. So I like the convergence of both worlds.
So a lot of people are thinking about what they want to create rather than what people want to watch or talk about. And it's often where people get stuck. And I've seen this, I come from the world of authors, where an author's like, I will only publish my book through traditional publisher. Like, it's been 10 years. It's not going to happen, right? After 10 years, maybe start a YouTube channel, like try a different path because it can work. Or they choose a topic that no one wants to hear about, right? Like, there's certain genres that I can't deal with. Something like, I had one client who wrote a horror book. I was like, well, I can't read this. It's too scary. I had to pay someone else to read the book and tell me about it, right? The book was great. The guy was so happy with the result. And I was like, I read the first chapter. I go, nope, too scary, right? But there's an audience for that. But sometimes people, and he knew his audience better than me. Like, he knew that genre. It's like, I don't read those books. I can't tell you enough. But oftentimes we're creating content that, and we pay no attention. Sometimes this is the best content, right? Where it's like, you're so happy you're making it. So often we're making content that's about a topic or about a structure, or it's caught in the past that is like, and that's why it's boring, or that's why it's not memorable, is because it's made for the creator rather than the observer, right? It's like that paradox of like, when there's an observer, it changes the result. But how can someone, and when you work with someone, how do you get them to start thinking of or understanding, well, what does your audience want, or how can it be reactive? Because what everyone really wants is to post a tweet that their favorite celebrity responds to. Like, that's the dream, isn't it? Is to get a response from someone famous. Like, that's the feeling that they want. So how can we?
So that one celebrity shares it, and then hopefully they think
yes,
other people will share it from that moment. By the way, if that
Yeah.
happens, and by the way, it's a strategy out there. That's a cool strategy, by the way, for people who are really looking to get noticed. And you better be prepared. When that moment happens, you really better know how you want to convert that audience. You have a shot. You have a shot at new eyeballs. You have instant visibility. If you're not retaining those eyeballs afterwards, it's because you didn't have something that was shareable. You just didn't follow up. You just didn't have something that was easy enough for your audience. And by the way, here's something about sharing. I hate saying lead with value. How about this? Lead knowing that someone's ego is out there looking for you to give them something that they can claim their own. This is we want to find information. We have this ego piece of us that wants to be the person who says, I've discovered this artist in the friend group. This is my movie, or when you're in high school, that's my boyfriend. We're the people who brought them into existence, and they would be nowhere. There's ego involved in discovery. I know that. I leverage that in my celebrity career at platforms where I knew I could say, I think we should cast this person. Not only do I think they're right for the project, but I think they're going to have a tremendous career, and we're going to be the network that put them on the map, and will forever be part of that artist's story for the rest of their trajectory. So if you're looking to make a long-term, and that's where if you're looking to make a long-term investment, this weird cycle between media, social media, streaming, that I would cast Laguna Beach 25 years ago, and now I'm finally getting credit on Netflix on a show I finally have a show on Netflix that for some reason, I know why, because MTV launched its own platform. But it's cool. That's a weird way for me to say how to get on Netflix. I don't know, cast a show 25 years ago. That's a cultural phenomenon show. It goes away, and then because of a podcast, thanks to Stephen Colletti and Kristen Cavallari, who had a podcast talking about Back to the Beach, about the behind the scenes of this, that show should be relevant again. That now people are I feel like it's like when people found out that Ricky Martin was part of Menudo beforehand, they're like, wait, there's more of the story? I had no clue. And I think that's what's happening in podcasting now as this world expands. We'll be part of it. We're not going to get lost in the space that's being created. We're part of the space that's being created. And another reason why I'm a big fan of anyone, whether you want to be a host and you feel confident in the structure and output and responsibility that it takes to be a host, or to be honest, as a guest. I have a podcast, but I also love guest podcasting. I record my podcast 6 days a year. I record 150 days a year other people's podcasts. That's how much more I like being a guest than being a host. And the space allows us to do that. And you don't even need to have a podcast to get out there. So again, just a big plug on that.
So I think what you said was really interesting about getting people invested in the story. And a great example of this I've seen is, for example, with romance authors I've worked with in the past, I said, why don't you email everyone who read book one and let them vote on who wins in book two, which of the main characters. And I remember I saw that work really well when it was like Team Edward or Team the other one in Twilight, like the vampire or the werewolf, right? And once people invested in their team, I feel like that was such a powerful way to get people to watch the movie twice or three times or to buy more merch because they're like voting and they feel invested. The more people can play a role in the decision making. Like I think that's why polls have been so powerful. Like when you get to vote, I remember when I was young and like they were like the MTV VJ contest and people could call in and vote. I don't know if those votes were real, right? Like I know some TV shows, the votes happen, don't go anywhere, but when your person wins, right, then you're like so invested in that. And then you're like, oh, I got to watch their show because I don't want the person I voted for to get fired. And I think there's this really big, you're exactly right, this investment effect that so often, because especially small creators, when they get a little bit bigger, they stop paying attention to their audience or they change or shift. They go, oh, now it's a different thing. And I think that's why there's a phase, like the first phase of success. Like about 5 or 6 years ago, there was a huge explosion in travel blogging and every single one of them, as soon as they made enough money to start traveling full time, went out of business within 3 months because once they were traveling, they spent all their time doing stuff and stopped writing. And all of those blogs died within almost at the exact same time because they weren't ready for the next challenge. They didn't know how to do the job and travel at the same time, right? But before they were writing in between trips and now they're traveling full time and it killed the business. And I think the same thing happens to people. They grow to their audience at a certain size where you can't reply. Like I'm always fascinated by people that leave comments on Instagram. There's 500,000 comments. I'm the 500,001th. It's mathematically impossible for someone to see your comment, right? If you read those comments for the rest of your life, you wouldn't get to 5,000, 100,000. It's so many. But there are people that will just leave this comment, I guess, in eternal hope. But there's even a size. Once you get a certain number of comments a day, you can't reply anymore, right? It's impossible to reply to everyone. And I think that's one of those points where people are like, well, how do I still stay in touch with my audience? How do I still connect with them when I can't do the one-on-one thing anymore? Like I've reached a point where I can't one-on-one remember every single person who's emailed me or left a comment. It's just too many, but I try my best. But I create characters in my mind that represent a couple of them that are the most common type of person that messages me.
Yeah.
But when someone's like doing more of what you're talking about, like it's a lot of social media, it's a lot of comments, how can they keep from getting distracted, especially when you like get your first call from a talent agent or you get your first like Dunkin' Donuts commercial, right? It's like, I've arrived, until you realize commercials have a lifespan, right? And sometimes the commercial never airs. All these things can happen, right? You don't know, or you get your first movie. You're so excited and the movie flops. Like the story's not over, right? There's always a new challenge, right? Like, oh, my book becomes a bestseller, I'll become a millionaire. Nope, turns out not, right? There's still more and more challenges. How do you help people to stay grounded or to keep from losing their audience? Because I think that's the most dangerous place for a person to be without like that initial support team.
Yeah, I think the answer is probably it's more who, not how. It's who's around you and who's keeping it takes people, to be really honest. There's not one celebrity I've worked with and I can even think of for 25 years, the people I've worked with, that their core, most of the 1% super successful people that I've worked with probably have retained, if not more than 50% of their original team. If something kind of catastrophic didn't happen or some weird family construct thing, how it happened in the late 90s, early 2000s, momagers, dadagers. But I think that it's about the who, not how. I think that when you know how to execute your brand, it doesn't matter what platform, what client is coming. Those are tools. Those are just ways to execute the brand. When you know how you want to be able to execute the personal brand too, meaning how you can and can't show up. I think you have a lot more control over now the time and date that you get discovered versus 20 years ago, where it was left to whim. It was left to, as you said, want to be a VJ or a guy like me tapping you on the shoulder at some concert saying, hey, you got a great look. You should come to the studio and I'll give you an opportunity. It was always my job to give people opportunity. But just to be clear, I was paid. That was my job, casting and talent development. Like producers aren't paid to do that, so they don't. Agents aren't paid to do that. Agents aren't paid to discover talent and develop new ROI. They're paid to bring in a bottom dollar for the agency based on headcount. So especially nowadays, if you're looking to grow your brand, and I'm not saying all agencies are the same, but if you're looking at the top 5, the top 15, and you're a brand new talent entrant to the market with zero ROI, zero existing collateral for them to step into, you're basically giving them something to do when they don't need it. They already have existing talent brands that they have to appease, or they're going to get kicked out in this market of consumption, all the way corporate consumption and content consumption all the way up. I strategically would be creating my own content. I think that the content we're creating now is going to be more valuable in the years to come than, even so much so that when people get on podcasts to talk about specific products or specific books, I think it's cool that we have the opportunity for there to be a quick reach and a massive reach right now. But I don't think people are fully understanding how relevant audio content can be. Like I come from TV. My stuff was 3:4 standard definition. Like people still talk about Punk'd and Osbourne's, maybe Newlyweds, because Jessica's a billionaire now. You know what I mean? There's some talk points about that, but it's mostly shared in the stories of these people's success. I think that people know those shows. So that, and in this world where content matters, where I think if you're in video podcasting and you're looking past the year 2023, you have to be shooting in 4K. And it's not because we should be, it's because there's going to be a point in 2024, 25 where platforms mandate a certain percentage of the video to be 4K, the same way that TV made us do it with 720 then 1080. Remember, there was like two different TV channels when standard definition was turning into HD. There will be a point in time where Verizon, PlayStation, Sony, these platforms that I can get your content on now will no longer take non-4K content because they don't want to take it off. It's not about putting it on. It's more expensive to have someone come remove content that doesn't meet the qualifications or the user experience they want. So understanding where you want to go, for me, it's just been about, I create now based on in the future. I think you framed the question brilliantly earlier about how when people create things, it tends to be a little bit on the nose. And here's a great example. There was the show Friday Night Tykes, Saturday Night Tykes. I think it was on History Channel. It was about parents and these kids, and there was like full contact sports. And it was a crazy documentary reality series because of just the action and exactly what I just pitched to you right there. Every parent or kid was like, wait, what? But in its success, the network, I remember having this conversation with the network. The network said, the reason we did it isn't because of the subject matter. It was because of the conversation around the subject matter. Should we be doing this? So we have to show people how it's done and what it is. And even those shows on Lifetime where the kids are in talent contests and some people feel their parents are pushing them to the max. And you have to show for what it is if you want to have a greater conversation about it. There's a responsibility that comes with that. With Lifetime, for example, Lifetime, History, A&E, those are privately owned networks. Those are not publicly owned companies on the stock exchange that could have taken that risk because of responsibility. So I'll say this, if you don't know what to talk about, responsibly I would start with receiving what will the results of someone listening to this episode do? What are they going to do? For me, I want you to be inspired, so inspired that you can take on the biggest creative obstacle of your life, whether it's finding the right person to collaborate with, finally settling down on an idea, figuring out how to get yourself awards, your team awards, how to leverage those awards, how to get this discovery ecosystem built, because it happens every year. And when you tap into it as a system and you create it and it's part of the alchemy of everything you're doing, it's not an exception, it's a part of those steps. And I think that's ultimately what helps get discovered, and do this. After you leave Jonathan a 5-star review for this stellar interview, by the way, I got to shout out. So, right before you did, by the way, share. That's the best, for me, that's the best. The universal action is sharing. Share that you had a great experience and as a 5-star review, that's so valuable because so many other people will come to this podcast and see your experience. And they'll say, well, I want to have a 5-star review experience too. That's cool. I can get information and a 5-star review. So let this be the one that takes you there. I hope you don't mind that plug, Jonathan.
I'm always in favor of great stuff like that. What you said was very interesting because some people are interested in the purity of art, right? Like the mindset of the starving artist, or I make a specific type of art and I don't want to commercialize it. And obviously for every musician and band, there's a point where you go, well, I don't want to put my music in that commercial, that political ad. But for a lot of people, their mindset is, I want the purity of the art. But you mentioned trying to win awards, which is very interesting to me because for a lot of people, they're like, oh, I don't want to win an award because it's about the purity of the art. And I come from the world of book publishing where almost every book award is rigged. Or the voting pool is so small. For the biggest awards in books, it's 3,000 people vote. And the way you vote is if you have a ticket to one of the conferences. It's like, wait, this award is by who? Like, who voted for this?
Socioeconomic barrier,
and it's like a $20 ticket. It's not even an expensive conference. It's like 2,000 or 3,000 people are voting on what's the best book of the year. But exactly that. And you're like, wait, I thought this was like prestigious. I thought this was like the best authors get together and have a meeting, a summit. And I've also noticed I run into a lot of authors that have won awards I've never heard of. And there's something I once talked about with one of my friends. I said, we should just start a writers union and just give out awards. Right. And then that could just be our thing. It's like everyone wants to be on our award show. It's like the people that invent Hall of Fames, right? Like it's how it starts. It's just someone goes, this is the Radio Hall of Fame in their house. And then they give people enough awards. They start getting, then they could get to a bigger building. But how should someone approach the idea of awards? Because no one's ever talked about this before. This is a very new topic to me. It's very interesting. How should someone think about getting an award? And is there leverage awards? And I'm very interested in this because every podcaster I've ever met has won some podcasting award that I've never heard of. It's like so many award-winning podcasts. And I'm like, this seems very strange because it's like, how do you separate it? Does it really make a difference if it's an award no one's ever heard of?
Yeah, right. Great question, by the way. And just because I won an Emmy award doesn't mean everyone in the world knows what an Emmy award even is, by the way. And I was strategic. I'll have you know, I sat back. I was in this room 2 years ago. And I said, I've been in TV 25 years. I've created killer shows. Like my talent, my legacy is in like the brilliant people that I've gotten to work with and continue to get to work with, by the way. But I didn't have an Emmy. Everyone else around me had an Emmy. I didn't qualify. I hadn't worked on a project as an executive producer on a national or local level that qualified me for it. And I realized that in documentaries, I could stand out. And I knew that I could stand out if I were to target a local market. Then I became sensitive about who was I going to win the award with? Because when you win an award, by the way, your name is grouped together with like-minded people. So I took that as I was really conscious, first and foremost. Who? Not how, right? First, I'm like, who am I going to win? Isn't that so weird? I'd be like, okay, how do I win an award? Well, first, what does the stage look like when I get up there and I say, thank you?
Yeah.
In my dream world, it would have had Mandy Moore on stage with me, and I'll give that story later. But it ended up being Kevin Harrington, Jeff Hoffman, the original CEO of Priceline, Brandon T. Adams, and we won it for a project called Red Flags. A&E has a show, Intervention, where people, there's a crisis, there's an intervention, and they go into rehab, and then happily ever after, that's where the episode ends. Our documentary started after she came out of rehab, and it was the red flags that, we as the people who support people coming out of rehab, or they themselves might want to share, and what are the red flags that, we should be aware of and be mindful of. We know the 12 steps, but what are the flags that we could really, how do we use those steps in comparison? What should we be looking out for? And it's such a meaningful, by the way, project. It's something I can closely relate to growing up as a teen. And I had parents who made decisions for us as children that allowed me to dive through trauma to get some superpowers that ended up being how to take sensitive topics and not to say bring humility to them or to even water them down, but to make them conversational, to get it shareable. How do I get a conversation like post rehab? By the way, for me, the answer is create a documentary where we can talk about it at dinner time, where we can say, hey, or we can talk about it when I'm passing by and I just want to be as a resource. Oh, you're going through something. I saw this documentary. I think you might I wanted to be a resource there so that I can share that story. And now, hopefully, fingers crossed, now that we've done one, and luckily there she is, my little lady, Emmy, I don't take her lightly. We'll take that idea to market. And now we are actively seeing if we can have that sort of how Catfish was a documentary and MTV turned it into an episodic, a TV show. And this is a big way that I'm pushing content makers. They're coming to me saying, hey, I've got funding and I can create 6-10 episodes. I'm like, why don't you create one 45-minute, one 90-minute, one 1 hour and 20-minute documentary? Nail it. Let's take it out to some festivals. Festivals are another way of getting awards. By the way, here's the funny thing about awards. There's Telly's Communicator Awards, W3 Awards. There's a little bit more on the premium end of the 4Reach purchasable, pay to play. Pretty much you're going to get a silver, but you're not always guaranteed. I've actually applied for some of those things where I thought everyone gets a silver and I didn't place at all. Some of those awards where it's a jury is judging your content based on established categorical criteria is more exciting to me than the stuff that competes us against each other, so to speak. So there's like those two different constructs where we're 5 or we're going to be narrowed down to 1 versus what you're saying, the Telly Awards, the Communicator Awards, which have awards at scale. But the weird thing about that is that if you look at those Telly Awards and Communicator, and some of those sometimes get poo-pooed, Disney, A&E, there's gigantic brands that are on there. Here's something that I don't think most people are doing. After I win awards, I go to IMDb. I take that as a data point from the award ceremony and connect it to all the episodes in whatever season gets the award. And I connect that to all the guests that are connected to all of those data points to every episode that I've created at IMDb as a data point. I also take that award and make sure that my company receives the award as well. So I'm an award-winning production company and an award-winning podcaster. So I can really maximize that and turn that into a data point, a link back that's actually going to be searchable, indexable, and affect my SEO on Google. So that's just one sort of geeky way, so to speak, to maximize it that some people I don't think are doing. But again, it's all about how you share it. All about how you share that info that makes it memorable. A lot of people win awards. So it's how you win. That's why the acceptance speech matters in the celebrity world. What you wear, how they stand out. These are things that, for example, if you won awards, then I might say on blog aggregators, right? So blog aggregators are where I can go and I say I want a blog about journalism. If you were to have be an award-winning journalism blog, a blog about award-winning journalism, you would stand out as the word award-winning versus all the other journalism blogs. And at a point in time where someone is looking for content in context of journalism, there you are and you stand out. And that, again, I think leads to more shareability, especially on aggregators, those platforms where you can read it and share it, or share it and then read it, or share it and not even read it. You know what I'm talking about, those, because people are looking for that content. And again, this is how you can be more shareable. That's the importance of creating blogs, by the way. Thinking about it, by the way, think of yourself more as the source, not the story. That'll really help the framing of how you're sharing content.
I think what you said about shareability is very interesting because a lot of people are missing that. Like, a lot of these videos that go viral are someone standing next to someone else where something has happened to them. Like, oh, I'm a nurse in a hallway or this happened or something, but it's not making it. Most of the conversation about it is, I can't believe the person did that, as opposed to, which is very challenging for the subject you talked about, to talk about in a way that's, I guess, classy is the right word, or allowed to have a conversation, because most people have someone in their lives that have been through one of those situations, right? So it's like you're basically hitting almost everyone, because everyone either knows someone or has someone in their own family where something happened. Almost every person I have on the show has someone like that. When that topic comes up, it's happened to me, it's happened to them. And so that's very interesting to me, because a lot of times we're so busy chasing the flash that we don't create the shareability, and we miss that part of shareability. Maybe it's the first tier sharing, right, where it flies around as a viral thing, but the second tier is where people actually want to talk about it or show their friends something. And that's a very, very interesting way of thinking about it, which is, can people talk about this at dinner? Is this a way to introduce people to a new topic? Because there are certain topics that are very difficult to talk about or taboo, whether it's people's having certain conditions and growing up in a certain way, or having something happen to them in the military, or it's someone who's had something happen to them that's outside of their control. A lot of times those are the hardest things to talk about, because we're like told we're not, but yet as a kid, right? Those are things we don't know. We're not supposed to talk about them. Like, little kids are so honest. Right. And I think that's very interesting, because people right now, there's this phase of figuring out how to communicate in a way that's honest, especially when videos are now like 7 seconds or 12 seconds. It's such a short amount of time to get a message across. And we're so busy being flashy, especially. I think that a lot of people, maybe this is where it comes from, a lot of people think that they have to act in the way that the brands they want to work with want them to act. Like, I can always tell when someone is making a commercial, even though they're not with a brand, because their voice changes, like they act differently. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like suddenly they're acting really differently when they're holding up like a backpack or something. I'm like, why are you talking weird?
That's right, Jonathan.
Like,
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, you do that. You're like, oh, I don't know if you know, but this is my favorite type of tea. And you're like, wait, why are you talking like that? It's interesting. I see this a lot in writing, where people are writing dialogue and they keep saying each other's first names back and forth in every sentence. I was like, no one talks like that. It would be so weird if every sentence was like, Vinny, I think you don't understand, Vinny, that as Jonathan, I feel completely different. It's like when people do bad impressions, they say the name of the person they're doing at the start of the impression. Oh my God,
that's always me.
It's like,
you mean like my Sean Connery impression, where I'm always like, hello, this is Sean Connery. And they're like, no, you can't. You have to do that. But there is this thing where we're trying to find that authenticity, right? And some people's authentic self is really crazy, right? Like, they're really extreme. They've always been doing attention stuff. They've always been doing like pranks in high school or whatever. But a lot of people think, oh, that's the only path, right? Like, what I always tell people, what happened to me is I wrote a blog about my dating life, because my dating life was insane. Like, the stuff that would happen to me was like so crazy. And I didn't know when I started, I didn't know other people could find your blog. So I thought I was writing a private diary, and it became, for like a couple of years, the number one blog on dating in the world. And someone called me and said, would you do a book with us? That's very hard to tell people to repeat. And I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't tell anyone to go on terrible dates, have tons of reject you. Like, my blog was like thousands of posts of being rejected in the worst ways. And I was like, it's so cathartic. And I was like, what is traffic? Why is my site on Google? Like, that's how I got started. Yeah. I was like, well, I guess it's happening. I got to lean into it. But I guess that's why I had so much authenticity, because I didn't know anyone else could find it. But very rarely are we creating content with that level of authenticity now. There's so much artificiality, and it's very confusing, because like, a lot of people watch a lot of reality TV, and people on reality TV are acting like they're on reality TV, right? It's not quite the way we act in real life. Like, we don't actually fight like that. I know there's a lot of it, maybe a lot of it's real, but there's certainly parts that are like amped up, where people act a little bit different because they want to get picked up for the clip, right? Like, you want to stay on the show. So there's this encouragement to be like a more extreme version of yourself. So I think that we're getting more and more used to, like, my generation, we learned how to act from Hollywood, right? And it's not real too. It's a different type of unreality. Like, I always think of When Harry Met Sally. People are like, that's such a romantic movie. I'm like, it took him 30 years to fall in love. That's the worst nightmare. Like, you know what I mean? Imagine 20 to 50. At 50, we're finally together. That's a really long time. It's like they always show you the dinner date, and then you go on a dinner date in high school and you're like, this is 4 hours. What am I going to talk about? The movie only showed 3 minutes of it. So we learned these different things, or these different, especially from sitcoms. It's like every conversation, like the parents on every sitcom would have the same fights.
like the fight about the wife nags too much or the fight about the husband wants to go fishing. No one in my family fishes, but I was like, I guess when I get married, I'm gonna have one of them fishing fights. So we learned, I think the next generation is learning a different type of artificiality because we call it reality TV. And it's, I think maybe 20, 30 years ago, it like, especially with like, was it the first one, The Real World? Maybe back then it was a lot realer, but at stuff now, right? There's so much production going on like that. It's hard for people to see what's real and what's not. So how can people, or how do you think is the way forward for people that are like, I guess they need to find their voice and then be shareable. Like those are the two challenges.
To be like, more authentic.
It's kind of like that advice. Yeah.
My first step would be create content for yourself. I'm so lucky that I've done this. I've done this for years. My friends were like, don't let Vinny take a picture because you're never going to see it. Yeah. Well, now on TikTok, all I do is post access to every place I've ever been, backstage, everywhere. And it's the coolest way actually for me to get the leverage where I was 20, 30 years ago, 10 years ago now, because I've been shooting content for myself, solo audience of one for a long time. And I got to be honest, there's something liberating in shooting something and knowing. And I'm not saying shoot 15 versions of the same image and one of them is for me. I'm like, I go out and I shoot stuff and I see something on the street or I see a sign, I take a picture. I take pictures just for me. And I think that's I didn't realize this in the process. I think it's a really cool way, a really cool mindset to have in terms of creating content and not necessarily intending to share it with somebody, because I take photos of things that I see the beauty in, not that I think the world. I also take photos of things that I think the world is going to see beauty in. There's intention in that. So why can't I put intention in the things that I found to be beautiful? Actually, this philosophy made me change my career. I realized all these things I have to do to get people cast in reality TV shows or get them in the reality. I have to help them live in the right place, have the right friends or the right social construct, the right words. You know, there's a responsibility that comes with being on those shows as well. All of those things that I did to help people get those spots. I don't need to be hired by a network to do what I do because I don't get paid by the network to really do the thing I do, which is help people leverage their fame. You know, I'm happy to help someone be famous if they're looking to leverage their fame to be an impactor, to make this world a better place. There's no one I've worked with that I can even think of and there's some celebrities out there in the world that I know are just happy to be celebrities that don't show up anywhere in any community, in any social circle or any part of it. All they want to be are artists. And I have nothing bad to say about them. I've just never gotten to work with, I don't know, those movie stars. And like, I've worked with it's weird to say this, but like Beyonce and Mandy Moore and Ashton Kutcher, like these people show up in our lives. Like they fight for us and like they leverage their fame and their notoriety and the awards they're winning for headlines that complement what they stand for. That's what I think is the benefit in winning awards and the part of the way to stand out. But I also know all those people create tons of projects for themselves. So we're creators. The last thing I want to do, by the way, and here's something to think of, and this is just my experience, my own personal experience too, and this has helped shape how I charge and work with people now even, is like I didn't want to get paid by the network to help people have that superpower, because I was only getting to work on certain types of shows for certain types of networks. I realized I can work with more people and help more people be impactful than if I were to do it the other way around. And I still have the same great relationships and I continue to network. By the way, I got to work harder now than ever in TV because the turnover rate is tough, man. On those execs, it's tough. This is a shrinking industry. It's retention. TV is about retention. This digital world that we're in is in growth mode. How could I not be focused on helping people own the content that they're creating, leveraging it from podcast to broadcast? Here's the future of ESPN2, the place where by the way, ESPN2, Walmart, Walgreens, CVS, every place is going to be a podcast directory. Here's my projection. Everyone's going to be a podcast directory. It's a pass through. We're all going to have our own podcast directories where we let certain podcasts just come in, the ones that we support, because we'll figure out a way for an advertising network to be connected to that content. We'll figure out a way for us through NFTs or through open source networking. We'll figure out a way for us to have ownership in content and scale it and continue to create it and not rely on social media, solo platforms like TV networks to amplify our content, right? We know publishing creates content. We know distribution plays content. Right now, most of us, our amplification strategy where we promote content, most of it is in social media. I want to bump us up to that aggregate, syndicate That's what you can do when you own your content. When you're not repurposing your podcast on social media, you're pre-purposing it because you know you have to advertise the episode. So you built it into the construct of the episode that you're able to scale. That's the part where I like to get you. And we're this close. And as a podcast community, and as people who listen to podcasts are part of it actively, we're a special breed of communicator, man. It's cool. We're listener, orator, creator, producer, whatever part you are in this podcast universe, if you're connected to it, we're a really unique tech, leaned in, tech advanced communicator. And I think that we can do stuff that is not going to happen in the big publicly traded sector of media. And that's, again, the big reason why I'm doing what I'm doing here, is empower that voice.
What you're saying about content ownership is so important, because so many people, they've had these big shows and then they don't own it, right? Or like you can lose the rights. I got offered, I DJ'd for a long time and someone's like, oh, I want to buy one of your songs. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Like I was starting out. And then it was like, but own the right to use my image in perpetuity. And I was like, oh, I know what that means. And I don't you could put anything you want on my face on a t-shirt, right? Like forever. Like that's such a thing to lose. And it was for $600. Like that was the worst mistake of my life. I'm so glad I said no. Especially whenever someone says, oh, don't let the lawyers get involved. They ruin everything. I know something terrible is about to happen to me. Like that's the number one sign they're going to do something terrible to me. It's like, don't talk to the lawyers in your family. Don't talk to your lawyers. I like my sister's a lawyer. My dad's a lawyer. My brother-in-law's a lawyer. It gets me real nervous, right? They've got me out of a lot of trouble.
I know.
And it's this, but we give up these rights and people don't realize owning your catalog, even if it's small, right? Like all these big
especially
artists now,
if it's small.
Their catalogs are owned by, it's like, oh, my catalog's owned by some finance company that just bought a ton of catalogs, or they bought like every company. So owning your content is so valuable. And I think people sometimes forget that. And they also forget that if your content is on one social network, you don't really own your channel, right? That's why you have to put your content in multiple places, because remember Vine? That's gone. Like Vine was really popular. And then I guess Twitter bought it and decided they didn't like it anymore because it just disappeared, right? Or Tumblr was so popular. Like I grew up on MySpace. I remember when every band had to have a MySpace page.
And comedian, right?
Right? It's that website. And you would think, well, that's never going to go. Like, I can't believe, thinking 25 years, I can't believe that didn't last forever. And so it's so important to own your content. And that does mean being able to move it from platform to platform, being able to have a sense of who you are and where you're going. And I think that especially for people that are starting out, because you can get famous so fast now. You can be 18, put up 10 or 20 really good TikToks, and you're having these really big pressures. Like I remember everyone was hating on, I forget his name, the young guy who like became a billionaire at like 18 because he bought a monkey and left it in Germany. I was like, if I had $1 billion at 18, I would probably do that too. You know what I mean? Like if I think about me at 18 with $1 billion, like I would be so much dumber stuff. And it's like, you can explode so fast now that I think that we think that we should wait to make the big decisions until the moment happens. And that's the worst time. Just kind of figure out, well, what do I want to stand for? What do I want to do? What direction do I want my career to go in? What's interesting is like everyone who gets big on TikTok's like, I want to be on YouTube. It's like, well, why? You're so good at what you're doing, right? Like it's because 6 years ago it was all about YouTube, right? And in 5 years it would probably be something different. So I think what you're saying is very interesting because you come from a world that's so different to mine, the other side of the television. I was watching all these shows, right? Now I found the guy that made them all. So interesting, right? It's very, very interesting to think about. But the core idea is exactly realizing that you're a brand. Like sometimes when I work with people, they're like, I don't want to give up my job. I want to have a career. I'm like, your career is your business, right? You can get promotions and be strategic. Like I work with people to write their first book and it's like, oh my gosh, I got a promotion because I'm a best-selling author. I was like, exactly. Like it's another way of adding another feather to your hat. So this has been very, very interesting, Vinny. I appreciate you spending so much time with me. We've gone over time. It was supposed to only last for 22 minutes. It's lasted for 50 because I've been having such a good time. So I really do appreciate it. This has been amazing. Tell people where they can find out more about what you're doing, see the other shows you've worked on, maybe see a picture of the Emmy, kind of all of the good stuff. Where can people find you online?
Sure,
What's the best place?
Hysterical. Yo, come hang out. I'm at VPE.tv. I have a creator hub where everything I've talked about, from 100 awards worthy of winning, creator platforms I think you should be on in 2023 if you're a podcaster, 50 creator marketing platforms that pay, like how I make a couple $100 to a couple of $1,000 a month just by throwing my name on a list. And I know someone's looking at it that's got cash in their pocket. I'll give this information away for free. I need us to be successful as we're stepping into this world together, especially as creatives. VPE.tv is my website. I'm Vinnie Potestivo on LinkedIn. Reach out and say hi. And I appreciate the space, Jonathan.
This is amazing. I'll put the links below the show notes. And everyone, make sure to go visit Vinnie's website at vpe.tv because it's very cool. I was checking out before the show. So thank you so much for being here. This was amazing.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. I love podcasting, and it's never too late to start your amazing podcast. Get started with my free guide at servemaster.com/checklist.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Serve No Master podcast. Make sure you subscribe so you never miss another episode. We'll be back next week with more tips and tactics on how to escape the rat race. Please take a moment to leave a review at servenomaster.com/iTunes. It helps the show grow, and more listeners means more content for you. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week.